Back in 1986, Robert Hiltzik, who is the creator, writer, director of Sleepaway Camp, he wrote a script, and that was called Sleepaway Camp Part 2. And he sent the script off to Jerry Silva, who was his producing partner on the original Sleepaway Camp. And Jerry read the script, and from what Robert tells me, Jerry felt that it was just too dark, and Jerry was hoping to take the franchise into a more comedic direction at the time. So Jerry asked Robert if he could buy the rights to Sleepaway Camp Part 2 and 3. And at the time, Robert had just started law school and he had just started a family. So he decided he'd go ahead and sell those rights.
I was in Georgia at the time, and I lived in Georgia there and did all of my early work in Georgia. Double Helix Films asked me to take a look at directing them. I had had experience as a director and a producer. I enjoyed both producing and directing, and I'd done some writing, and they just asked me to take a look at the projects. I was sort of intrigued by the idea. I'd never done a horror film. I didn't want to do a typical horror film. I was a fan. I'd seen a lot of horror, but I knew that in a way that genre had already kind of played itself out. I used to call it the dead teenager movie, you know, and it was so formulaic. And I thought there had to be some way that you could kind of play with the formula a little bit while still giving the expectations of the fans, you know, fulfilling those expectations, but then having some fun.
Then Jerry Silva, his team hired a writer by the name of Fritz Gordon, and he wrote the scripts for the sequels. And I have to say, still to this day, when it comes to blending a horror and comedy movie together, Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 are two of the best examples of, you know, putting two movie genres together like that.
What are you looking for? A gun? No? A drill.
Fritz and I wanted to do the film, but we were both determined not just to do another kind of slasher film. Even at that point in the 80s, I felt like that genre had really been played out in terms of that first wave of slasher films and dead teenager movies. And we kept trying to figure out how can you have fun with the genre, kind of play with it a little bit, play with the expectations of the audience, but at the same time fulfill the expectations.
It was the sense of humor and the kind of complete irreverence. Horror is already a kind of an irreverent medium, but then to make a film that's making fun of an irreverent medium is another kind of level of irreverence, and that just thrilled us all. I mean, I think everyone who read that script thought this is hilarious. Nobody thought that it would be more than just something that we would make and end up on a few video shelves and everyone would forget about it in a few years. But I mean, maybe Michael and a few others had the vision to see that this is a little more than just a great joke.
So then I decided to call the Shit Sisters.
You know something? You talk too much.
Fritz had a great sense of humor, and I really give him a lot of credit for a lot of that kind of quirky, dark humor that he infused the script with. And you know, he very cutting edge in a lot of ways in that he came up with the idea of naming everybody after the Brat Pack.
I had not met Fritz prior to the original filming, and the first time that I had the opportunity, seemed like we were about halfway through Sleepaway 2, as I recall, and Jerry Peace came to me, he was the AD, and said, we've got a gentleman going to be with us tomorrow from Nelson Entertainment. And he's one of the Nelson Entertainment executives. And then he kind of winked at me. He said, it's really Fritz Gordon that's going to be here. So he was coming under a pseudonym so that people wouldn't realize he was the writer, because there was a lot of sort of funny comments being made about the script, like, oh, you know, just sort of off-the-cuff stuff. But when he actually arrived the next day, everybody played it like they didn't know he was the writer, but there were several times that it was interjected, you know, who wrote this script? What was he trying? What was he doing? So we had a lot of fun with him on that one. But overall, he was very hands-on in terms of the script, working with Michael.
Michael was a lot of fun. Michael, it was a small group of us. At the time, there was only, you know, the film community was pretty small, and we were all pretty tight because we all worked together all the time. And Michael was a part of that. So it was one big family that was there. Michael knew what he wanted, you know, and he got it out of us. We did what we could for him, you know, because our resources were limited. But we all had a very good time.
I know a true story. There used to be this camp about 60 miles from here. Camp Arawak.
Yeah, I heard about that, and all these kids got killed.
Shut up.
Only after they asked me to do it, before I accepted the job, I said, you know, let me look at the original. Don't remember a lot about it. I watched it literally one time. I remember there was a really long sequence involving softball that seemed to... I remember the time I got up and went into the kitchen, I got a beer, the phone rang, I had a conversation on the telephone, finished my beer and came back, and the softball game was still playing. So I thought I must have not missed too much. But the thing everybody remembers, obviously, is the ending. It was a great shock ending, which is to this day the thing everybody talks about, and it was, you know, I think that was brilliant.
I don't think there was ever any goal to try to create what was done in the first film, even though it had, you know, limited success. But when we watched it, I felt like the film had a different style than what we were trying to capture. We were going to go for something a lot more stylized and with a fair amount more gore and certainly more humor. The first film, to me, just was a little flat.
The most interesting thing about that first film was the great twist at the end. That was the thing that everybody talked about. And we thought, well, that's the thing you should really concentrate on and let that be the focus of the sequels. Where can you take that character in a way, in a place that no one has ever gone before? And we talked about it, and that's when the idea of having her go under the knife and have a little snip and becoming a transsexual, kind of, you know, transgender, change her gender. That's what suddenly caught my attention. And I thought that was a really exciting thing because, quite frankly, it had never been done, to my knowledge, in any film where you had a transsexual psychopathic killer. And the fact that she'd gone to therapy and had this change, you know, sex change, I thought, well, now you're talking about a really great premise for a film, and where can you take that?
I used to be shy. I'd never talk to anyone. You? Now you can't get me to shut up.
Felicia Rose, I understood that she was in college and was going to concentrate on that. And of course, we were not shooting in New York, we were going to shoot in Georgia. So I opened up casting. I did casting in Georgia. I did it in New York, and I also did it in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles was the last place we came. I had looked in Atlanta. I had looked in New York. In fact, in New York, I read Tracy Griffith for that role. And Tracy, I was really impressed by her work. I mean, I could tell she had chops as an actress, but I didn't think she had quite the right look for Angela. When we got to Los Angeles, my recollection is Pam was actually the first person that read for the role. And that day, I think they had 8 or 10 people scheduled to read. And I remember going out and telling the casting person just to cancel the rest of that I knew I had found probably within 30 seconds of her reading. And it was interesting because her approach to the character, she brought a quirkiness to the read, where you could tell there's maybe just something slightly off in her mental faculty or something, in her emotional balance. And at the same time, she read it in a way that made it feel funny, but you could also believe that she would pick up a knife or, you know, run somebody up a flagpole and drop them. So I knew I'd found who I thought could do the role, could do Angela.
Speak of the devil. Look who's on TV. I gotta go. I'll be back in a few minutes, and TC and Sean can keep you company.
Pamela Springsteen was probably one of the highlights of the film. She was such a great person, great actress to work with, always accommodating, always coming up with really goofy, crazy stuff that really worked. I think without Pam's personality injected into the film, it would not have been as successful as it was.
If it's any consolation, you almost made it.
She had a wonderful kind way about her. She was a very unseasoned actress, and she was a bit insecure, but I worked with her and tried to help her feel comfortable and confident in her work, and gave her the encouragement to do what I knew she could do, and it worked. She just did a great job.
My memories about the actors and stuff there, I mean, they were all really pretty nice. I mean, we were all young and enthusiastic, and I mean, I was real excited about Renee Estevez because, you know, I knew her family, or knew who they were and everything like that, and Renee was really super sweet. I mean, she was a really, really sweet girl, and Tony Higgins is really cool. I remember hanging out with him. I actually worked with him again years later on a movie which actually Gwyneth Paltrow played his wife. It was a movie called Deadly Relations. And he was a cool guy. I mean, everybody was really nice. I can't remember any complaints about any of the actors or anything. They were all pretty cool. I mean, Valerie Hartman, I mean, I remember she stuck around for part 3 to help out.
The people on the shoot were having a good time, clearly. I mean, you can tell that when you watch a film, whether people were having a good time as they made it or not. And I think it's clear with these films, everyone was having a great time. But I think they were working very hard days, very long hours. To shoot 2 feature films back to back in 6 weeks is grueling. There's no other way to do it. And this was in the days of 35mm film with magazines and, you know, check the gates and all the things that you have to do with film that take more time than video.
Shooting in Georgia at that time, doing production in Georgia at that time, was very challenging. There weren't really sound stages per se there, and of course now anybody who goes to Georgia for production, I mean, it's top tier. They have, gosh, 5 or 6 sound stage facilities, studio facilities. You know, huge studio films are being shot there now, and television series, Walking Dead. But the infrastructure was not really in place. It was kind of sketchy.
The conditions and where we shot the films was at an old camp that was in Waco, Georgia. Had been abandoned for years, and I know that they had to go in and do some cleanup and things like that there. Like the pool was apparently pretty nasty, and they had to do stuff to try to clean the pool enough to where people would get in it.
The pool was just heavy green algae. I mean, just nasty stuff. And we poured tons of chlorine into the water trying to kill it. And we had somebody take a sample, and they ran it and said, no, there's, you know, the water's fine. It won't hurt anybody as long as the kids don't mind, you know, swimming around in the algae. And of course, the kids were all game for it. You know, to them it was like, oh, this is fun. Let's just play with the algae. And they were picking up algae and throwing it at each other between shots.
Well, all the cabins were there. We didn't build anything on the grounds. We built the interior on a stage, like 30, 40 miles from Waco. And the conditions there, we were in a real camp outside, you know, when it rained, it was a problem because it was rather muddy. And the road into the camp was you had to go down a hill to get into the camp. And it was raining so hard that we were having trouble getting back out. So we were all wondering if we were going to actually make it back to the hotel.
Jerry, Peace, Michael, Keith Scherer, the gaffer, and I had spent several days, maybe even a week or so, just scouting the location at the camp. And we would go through, we would set up scenes, Jerry would make copious notes, which ended up being translated to a strip board, so that when we actually showed up to do the film, we were pretty well knew where we were going to be and where the gear was going to go. It wasn't a helter-skelter type of approach. We were very systematic about how we did it. We knew the locations, we knew our limitations in terms of how deep into the woods we could go.
And for the most part, the crew as well as the cast stayed on the location. So there wasn't a lot of commuting. Some of them would commute back and forth. For the most part, everybody kind of stayed there, which kind of made it fun because a number of people that were on the crew were musicians who some of them had actually played together in bands and stuff, and so they brought their equipment, and often at night, if we were having a day shoot after dinner, after we wrapped, they would set up in what was the dining hall and jam and play, and people would, you know, have libation. And,
we were working in a dry county, so in the evenings, our security people and our police would go make a run for us, pick up some booze so we could have our party and get the music going, start the fire in the big fireplace.
One of my fondest memories of camp was balsa wood double axe, which was used in one of the murder scenes. And I still have that axe to this day and use it often for kind of playing jokes on people.
Splat, and I was one of the people who gave him that nickname because he was just starting out in the business, but he was so good. He was very good, he was very innovative, and he knew how to do great effects on a budget.
I had been taking this course from Dick Smith, he is the guru of makeup and makeup effects. He did Amadeus and The Exorcist and Godfather, and so I was in the process of learning this stuff, and I was working in an art store at Gwinnett Place Mall. And the funny thing is, I'm sidetracking, but I remember they were shooting the Evil Dead 2, and Bruce Campbell called me up at the art store while I was still working there, wanted me to do some mechanical effects for it, which I don't do mechanical effects, and so I had to turn it down. But it's just funny here. I am at this little art store getting calls in these movies, but I was listed in the Georgia Film Book because I had already done several like student type films or low budget films, and I guess Michael Simpson and Bob Phillips were going through the book, and they were calling different people.
At first, I kind of was a little put off by him. I thought he was a little strange, but the more I got to know him, the more I realized just how forensic he had done his research. And he was so in depth with how he created the death scenes and how he created the effects on a lot of the live people.
And I was very green back then, and I had a certain process of the way I thought things would be, and things weren't exactly what I expected. And there's a lot of things I didn't know about taking continuity photos, things like that, because I never had really that much experience. All the stuff I'd done before, we didn't do continuity photos. It was all student stuff. So there was a lot of little things that was, probably was not good on my part, but it was basically being thrown into the fire or thrown into deep water and expecting to swim.
With the resources that they had and what they got on that shoot is pretty amazing, because almost every day was another special effect with some kind of murder or blood or a knife or something. And they made the decision right up front not to make it super realistic. I mean, none of the violence is that real. It's actually, you're supposed to laugh probably more than anything. She's having her head shoved down in the toilet and looking at the leeches. I mean, that's kind of the most horrific one for me, because it's like, it's so gross.
The funny thing about that scene is, it's not that you see all the urine and the feces covering her or anything like that. It's the way that it was shot and the sound effects, and just knowing that, she was down there in that pile of shit and there was no coming back from that. I just thought that was, one of the nastiest deaths I'd ever seen. And still to this day, I think that's probably one of the nastiest death sequences ever made, and all without even really having to show too much.
Actually, somebody had emailed me at one time and asked me if any of those leeches were still available so they could have a souvenir.
My favorite memory from part 2 is where Mare gets her head drilled in the car, because they needed a car to shoot that in, and we knew we were going to be spraying blood and stuff, and I guess there was a little apprehension of anybody letting them use their car, so I let them use my car for the scene. So we shot this whole scene where we're spraying blood up in the air, and I'm like in the seat spraying the blood up, as she's drilling, and it got all up on my seat belts. And so what would happen is, because it was cold, they'd stay there, but when the summer days would come in years later, every once in a while blood would start dripping out of the seat belt fittings, because the blood was, warming up and coming loose and stuff like that. So it's the car that dripped blood, and I can just imagine whoever got the car after me probably, there's no telling what they thought. But that was a fun memory for me. I mean, I remember the cabin stuff with all the bodies was the most intense stuff, because that's where we had to have the most effects stuff together. I know when we did the acid gag, I had read about a technique where you're using a certain AB smoke to give an acid effect that turns out that'll actually burn your skin, and the instructions didn't tell you that. So my assistant got burned.
I feel like the special effects in this achieved a perfect tone, because with the limited budget he had, if he had tried to make them more horrific or more believable, he wouldn't have been able to get through the film. You know, they would have spent their whole budget and all the time they had on the first few murders and wouldn't have had anything left to finish it.
One of the big challenges I was dealing with minors. So on the set, we had people from the Georgia Department of Labor to make sure we were following very closely guidelines. We had a teacher, because some of them required to, have a certain amount of schooling each day. There were some scenes that we had to kind of shoot because the kid was a minor and they actually couldn't be on the set. Obviously you couldn't be on set if you had any sex or nudity or any violence.
I was actually originally cast as my sister, who Carol ended up playing, but my parents wouldn't let me do it because of the making out scene, and there were certain laws at the time, I believe, that prevented some of the kids that were under 18 from doing certain things. Like I wasn't allowed on the set when there was certain activities going on.
One of them was too young to be on the set for her own death, and she's one of the ones who got barbecued. So we came up with it, and her older sister was old enough to be on the set. So what we did was have the older sister find the younger sister already killed, and then we did the second sister's killing on camera.
But I remember hearing her through the woods, the most horrible, awful scream I've ever heard in my life. And it was everybody that was back at camp was like, wow, that was really cool. So.
I think one of my favorite scenes in Sleepaway 2 was the when Angela dressed up as the Chainsaw Massacre guy and kind of comes up on the guy in the woods and sneaks up on him, and we do the focus pull back to her, and it just had such a great feel to it. We had this really beautiful blue moonlight rig working in the backlight. Pretty much everything we did at night was 3/4 back key. We were shooting with a very nice Agfa film stock, which gave us really rich blacks, but it kept the tonality through the whole range. Really had a lot of fun with that particular scene, as we did on a lot of the night scenes. I think just working with the lighting, working with the props, and getting everything dialed in together was one of the great things about working with the folks on the crew there. We just had a really good team, and everybody was trying to make, good film.
We were contracted to deliver an 80-minute film. Otherwise, it wouldn't be considered a feature film. And I think our cut was 78 minutes with everything in it. I mean, we couldn't cut anything. And there were things we wanted to cut, or even just speed things up by getting rid of some of the establishing shots. But we needed 2 more minutes. We couldn't cut. So Michael called me, because they keep a track as they're shooting of how long the scenes are, and the script supervisor has a pretty good idea how long it's going to be when it's edited together. And near the last day of shooting, one of the last days, they called and said, look, our count says that we're going to be 2 minutes short. What is your count? And I had my assistants put it all together, and we added it all up. And I said, yeah, you're right. It looks like it's a 78-minute film. And they said, well, we have to come up with 2 minutes of something. What can we do? And I remember having the idea that Angela could have a dream, and she could, I said, Michael, just shoot Angela tossing and turning in bed, like unhappy, not sure what having a dream, having a nightmare. And we'll cut in the shots of the murders along the way. It was an idiotic idea, I thought, like, what else can I do? But somehow we made it work, and we used a Happy Camper song in the background with it and slowed it down with this really eerie voice, so that it actually became a kind of a nice part of the film, I think, and it filled those 2 minutes, which was the whole point of it.
I'm a happy camper. I love the summer sun. I love the trees and forests.
We went in with the expectation of doing 2 and probably doing 3, but everybody sort of took a look and see attitude. I remember we cut, John Allen, the editor, had cut some rough scenes, and we showed them to Double Helix and the suits at Nelson, and everybody saying, yeah, so let's just do 3. I think we had literally maybe a weekend between the wrap of 2 and the beginning of 3. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where you just sort of say, okay, we're going to wing it, and it's like jazz, you just keep playing, you know.